The desert lies in silence, stretching endlessly beneath a vast canopy of stars. The night winds move softly over the dunes, carrying with them grains of sand that have drifted for thousands of years, reshaping the land in quiet patterns. There is something eternal in this silence, something older than memory itself. Egypt at night feels less like a country and more like a dream. The air is cool, the horizon is dim, and all around is a presence of time itself, ancient, unbroken, and endlessly patient. It is within this silence that forgotten stories rest. Stories of pharaohs who once ruled the two lands of Egypt, but whose names have long since faded from the tongues of men. They are not the giant of history whose faces adorn textbooks and museums, but shadows, whispers, fragments of memory left in strange tombs that time itself seems hesitant to preserve. When we think of Egypt, our minds instantly turn to the great names, Tutankhamun, Ramses, Cleopatra, Akhenaten. Their tombs and temples are famous, their images recognizable, their stories retold countless times. Yet for every pharaoh whose name survived the centuries, there are others who slipped into silence. Their reigns were brief or contested, their monuments defaced or abandoned, their burial sites unusual and often puzzling. These rulers existed in the same golden age, walked the same palaces, and prayed to the same gods. But unlike their more fortunate counterparts, they were swallowed by time, leaving behind tombs that raise more questions than answers. The sands of Egypt are not uniform. Some lie over treasures, carefully guarded for eternity. Others conceal fragments of forgotten rulers, half-finished corridors carved into stone, burial chambers that feel too small for a king, inscriptions abandoned mid-story as though the chisels were suddenly stilled. To stand at the entrance of one of these neglected tombs is to feel the weight of absence. There is grandeur in Tutankhamun's resting place, a sense of completeness and ceremony. But here, in the tombs of the forgotten, there's unease. Why are they incomplete? Why do they seem misplaced, even hurried? What does it mean when a pharaoh is not remembered? The desert holds no judgment. It covers all things with equal patience, erasing the mighty and the meek with the same slow sweep of wind. Yet human memory is less forgiving. We choose to remember certain rulers and let others fade. Some were erased deliberately by successors who feared their legacy. Some were simply unlucky, ruling too briefly to leave a mark. Others defied tradition and were punished by the silence of history. In this opening, we invite you into a journey not of the well-lit corridors of celebrated tombs, but of the quiet, dim passages where the forgotten lie. Imagine walking slowly through the desert in the cool hours before dawn. The stars guide you, the sand crunches beneath your feet, and in the distance, black silhouettes of cliffs rise like sleeping giants. Somewhere within those cliffs, hidden in shadows and silence, lie tombs rarely spoken of. There are no long lines of visitors here, no flashing cameras, no polished signs explaining the lives of the rulers. Instead, there's only stillness. Perhaps a faint carving on the wall, a broken statue face down in the dust, a passage that leads to nothing but darkness. These are the traces of the forgotten pharaohs, those who once carried the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, yet now rest in obscurity. This is not the Egypt of postcards or glossy museum exhibits. This is Egypt as it truly is, layered, uneven, half-remembered, filled with questions that refuse to be fully answered. To explore the forgotten pharaohs is to explore the limits of history itself, to accept that not all rulers are destined for eternal fame, and that sometimes the desert chooses silence instead of remembrance. And in that silence lies the greatest mystery. There is a strange comfort in this. To know that history, vast and sweeping, is not a straight line of glory, but a patchwork of stories, some luminous, some dim, and some lost entirely. The forgotten pharaohs remind us that time is not merciful and memory is fragile. Yet their strange tombs remain as proof that even those whom history seeks to erase leave behind traces. A wall, a chamber, a broken name carved into stone, fragments of existence resisting complete disappearance. As we begin this journey, let the desert guide you. Listen closely to the wind as it slides across the dunes, for it is carrying echoes of voices no longer heard. These are the voices of rulers whose names have been buried deeper than their tombs. They may not speak as loudly as the great pharaohs remembered in stone, but their whispers carry mystery all their own. In their silence, they invite us to wonder, who were they? What lives did they lead? And why, after all their power and ritual, did they vanish into obscurity? The story you are about to hear is not one of triumph alone, but of mystery, shadow, and contrast. Between the stars above and the sands below lies a forgotten chapter of Egypt's royal past. Tonight, as the world quiets and you drift deeper into stillness, let the desert open its pages. Step gently into the realm of the forgotten pharaohs and their strange tombs. The sands are waiting, and they whisper softly, "Remember." The Egyptians saw death not as an ending, but as a passage. To them, the line between life and the afterlife was not a sharp cut but a bridge, a continuation of existence under new conditions. Their desert land, harsh and eternal, shaped this vision. The Nile flooded, crops grew, people thrived, and yet all lives eventually returned to the silence of the earth. This rhythm of renewal and decay taught the Egyptians that nothing truly vanished, it transformed. Death, then, was not feared in the same way it is feared today. It was prepared for, shaped, and anticipated with ritual care. From the earliest dynasties, pharaohs and commoners alike lived with the certainty that their souls would journey on. The afterlife was called the Field of Reeds, a mirror image of earthly life, but perfected, lush, abundant, eternal. There, one could farm without toil, eat without hunger, and live without suffering. To reach this paradise, however, the soul had to be judged and found worthy. It had to pass through trials, guided by prayers, amulets, and sacred spells. And so, the tomb was not merely a resting place of bones. It was a carefully designed vessel, a spiritual machine built to carry the soul into eternity. For the pharaohs, this process carried greater weight. They were not just individuals, but gods on earth, mediators between the divine and mortal realms. Their tombs reflected this role, immense, intricate, filled with treasures and symbols meant to secure not only their own afterlife, but the cosmic order of Egypt itself. When a great king was buried, it was not only a personal transition, but a reaffirmation of the balance between gods and men. This is why the pyramids rise so sharply from the desert sands, why the Valley of the Kings is filled with carved corridors painted with celestial journeys. The tomb was not a grave, it was a cosmos in miniature. Yet for all the grandeur we associate with Egyptian tombs, there is also a quiet vulnerability. These elaborate structures, so carefully planned, were built in fear as much as in faith. The Egyptians knew that without proper rituals, the soul could wander lost. If a body decayed, if a name was forgotten, if offerings ceased, the soul would suffer a second death, true annihilation. To be remembered was to exist. To be forgotten was to vanish completely. This is why names were carved into walls, why likenesses were painted on coffins, why statues were made to endure. Memory itself was a form of immortality. Here lies the deep contrast. The known pharaohs we recall today are the ones whose tombs were preserved, whose names survived effacement, whose monuments resisted time. The forgotten ones lost not only their crowns in life, but their eternity in memory. Their tombs, strange and incomplete, reflect the fragility of that bridge between worlds. Where a great ruler like Seti has corridors stretching with magnificent murals of gods and stars, a forgotten ruler may rest in a chamber of bare rock, his journey into eternity uncertain. Did their souls reach the Field of Reeds? Or were they stranded in shadow because their names were erased? Imagine standing in the Valley of the Kings, where the tombs of great rulers line the cliffs like hidden libraries of stone. Each one tells a story, gods guiding the pharaoh through the night sky, protective spells etched into walls, treasures laid carefully for eternity. And then, picture a smaller, humbler site far from the grand necropolis. A narrow passage, unfinished, perhaps reused, perhaps abandoned. Inside, little more than a sarcophagus, perhaps a broken statue, perhaps even no inscription at all. In such a tomb, the Egyptian dream of eternity feels fragile, even broken. Here, the grand vision of death as continuation falters, and mystery takes its place. The rituals of death reveal as much about life as they do about the afterlife. Egyptians poured enormous energy into preparing for death because they valued life so deeply. Every offering, every amulet, every carved spell was an attempt to preserve the sweetness of existence. For pharaohs, this was magnified. Eternity was their divine right, their destiny. But even destiny could be denied. If a ruler fell from favor, if his name was chiseled out by successors, if his tomb was left unfinished, his afterlife was placed at risk. The silence of such tombs is not only architectural but spiritual. They are graves of interrupted journeys. This belief system also explains the intensity of tomb construction. Pharaohs began planning their tombs almost as soon as they took the throne, knowing that death could arrive at any time. Some reigned for decades, leaving vast chambers filled with intricate art. Others ruled only briefly, and their tombs show the haste of sudden endings. The contrast is striking. One tomb is a library of eternity, another a whisper cut short. In both, however, lies the same desire, to cross from sand into forever. When modern eyes look upon Egyptian tombs, we often see only artifacts or historical curiosities. But to the ancients, every detail was alive with purpose. The choice of stone, the direction of a corridor, the placement of an image, all were symbolic steps in the pharaoh's journey beyond death. To enter a tomb was to enter the universe itself, a sacred space where time and eternity touched. This is why the forgotten pharaohs' tombs, strange and incomplete, haunt us so deeply. They are not merely ruins. They are broken bridges, unfinished journeys, mysteries carved into stone. The Egyptian view of death was not dark, nor was it despairing. It was hopeful, filled with visions of beauty and renewal. And yet, its fragility reveals itself in the forgotten tombs. A missing name could mean eternal silence. A broken wall carving could mean a lost prayer. A pharaoh without remembrance was a soul without light. This is the paradox. A culture that built eternity into stone still could not guarantee it. The desert devoured as easily as it preserved. And so, as we move deeper into our journey, we must keep this vision in mind. To the Egyptians, tombs were not empty monuments. They were living vessels of spirit and memory. When those vessels are strange, incomplete, or forgotten, they tell us more than any intact monument can. They show us the cracks in eternity, the fragile places where human ambition met the unrelenting silence of time. Between eternity and sand, the Egyptians built their dreams. Some stand tall even now, commanding or across millennia. Others lie broken and forgotten, buried beneath layers of silence. Both remind us that in death, as in life, memory is a true guardian of existence. Without it, even a king can fade into shadow. History remembers some names with startling clarity. Tutankhamun, with his golden mask, is known even to children. Ramses the Great, whose colossal statues glare across the desert, looms as a symbol of enduring power. Cleopatra's dramatic end has ensured her a place in legend. But for every ruler immortalized, there are others whose reigns are dissolved into obscurity. They walked the palaces of Memphis, issued decrees, wore crowns of gold, and commanded armies. Yet today, they exist only as faint mentions on crumbling stele or as puzzle for archaeologists to untangle. These are the pharaohs lost in time, shadows of Egypt's great past whose names hover between memory and silence. The reason for their obscurity are varied. Some ruled during chaotic periods when dynasties fractured and Egypt itself seemed uncertain of its identity. In times of political upheaval, a ruler's name might vanish simply because the kingdom lacked stability to preserve it. Others were deliberately erased, their images chiseled away by successors who saw them as rivals, usurpers, or heretics. Some, tragically, were forgotten not because of malice, but because they ruled too briefly to leave an imprint on eternity. A reign of months, even years, could vanish when compared to the decades-long legacies of stronger rulers. Consider Sobonneferu, one of Egypt's rare female pharaohs. She reigned near the end of the 12th dynasty, stepping into power after the death of her brother Amenemhat IV. She ruled with strength, blending masculine and feminine imagery to assert her authority in a world dominated by men. Yet her reign lasted only about 4 years. With her death, the dynasty ended, and chaos followed. Her tomb has never been conclusively found. For centuries, her name drifted into silence, resurfacing only in fragments of stone and passing mentions on ancient lists. Unlike Cleopatra, Sobonneferu left no dramatic story for later historians to weave. She was powerful, yet forgotten, a queen whose existence now hovers at the edge of memory. Then there is Smenkhkare, perhaps the most enigmatic of all. His reign during the Amarna period was so fleeting, so mysterious, that even today scholars debate whether he was a distinct ruler at all. Was he Akhenaten's brother? A son? A co-regent? Or was Smenkhkare another name used by Nefertiti herself? His images are scarce, his name incomplete, his tomb uncertain. What little remains of him feels like smoke, visible for a moment, then gone. In a culture obsessed with preserving memory, Smenkhkare slipped through the cracks, a ghost king whose identity may never be certain. Other forgotten rulers include those who were deliberately erased. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who abandoned Egypt's traditional gods in favor of the sun disk Aten, was nearly wiped from history. His successors worked tirelessly to remove his memory, chiseling out his name and destroying his monuments. For centuries, he vanished. Only modern archaeology revived his story. If Akhenaten had not left behind the ruins of Amarna, his experiment in monotheism might have been lost entirely. How many lesser rulers suffered the same fate, forgotten not by chance but by design? And beyond the erase are the rulers swallowed by obscurity simply because they lack spectacle. Egypt's history is long, over 3,000 years of dynasties, kings, queens, and rulers both great and small. Some inherited crowns but achieved little before their reigns ended. Others were swept aside by more dominant successors. Their tombs were modest, their monuments neglected, their names left off grand lists compiled by later dynasties. In this way, the desert became their true equalizer. Whether they rule for months or years, they too lie beneath the sand, but their stories are harder to tell. The contrast between remembered and forgotten rulers is stark. Ramses II carved his name across Egypt in towering letters. His statues, temples, and tomb ensure his immortality. But a ruler like Senebke, a minor pharaoh of the Second Intermediate Period, lies in a modest tomb with little decoration. His name was only rediscovered in 2014 when archaeologists stumbled upon his resting place. Until then, he was a blank in history, absent from king lists and unknown even to experts. His rediscovery shows how fragile memory is, how easily a king can be lost, how easily he can return only by accident. Walking among the forgotten names is like walking through a half-lit hallway. Some corners are illuminated, revealing a face, a cartouche, a story. Others are dark, offering only questions. Did these rulers feel the weight of eternity as strongly as the great pharaohs? Did they trust their tombs to preserve them forever? Or did some know, even in life, that their reigns were fragile, their memory uncertain? The strangeness of their tombs, their incompleteness, their unusual placements, echo this fragility. A tomb unfinished at the time of death tells us not only of hurried builders, but of a soul whose path into eternity was rushed. And yet, their obscurity carries its own fascination. To study a forgotten ruler is to step into mystery. Every shard of pottery, every broken inscription, every faint mention becomes precious. Archaeologists must reconstruct live from fragments, piecing together dynasties like puzzles with missing parts. And for the listener, there's calm wonder in knowing that Egypt still holds secrets. Not everything has been explained. The sands still conceal names, and the tombs of forgotten rulers wait in silence. In the contrast between Tutankhamun's dazzling treasures and a forgotten pharaoh's empty chamber lies a deep truth. Memory is not distributed fairly. History is not a balanced scale. Some are granted eternity in golden masks, others vanish almost entirely. Yet both once held the same crowns, prayed to the same gods, and walked under the same desert sun. The difference is not in who they were, but in how time chose to remember them. As we continue deeper, we will walk closer to their tombs. We will look at strange designs, half-carved walls, and abandoned chambers. But before we step into those silent places, let us pause here, in the realm of forgotten names. For it is here that the mystery begins, not with stone or treasure, but with the absence of memory itself. To be forgotten is perhaps the strangest fate of all, and in that silence lies the most haunting question. Who else has been lost, waiting still beneath the sand? In the imagination of many, Egyptian tombs follow a single image. Grand corridors cut deep into rock, walls painted with divine journeys, chambers brimming with treasures, and the sarcophagus of a king resting at the heart of eternity. But not all tombs match this vision. Scattered across Egypt, in places both familiar and remote, are tombs that seem to break every expectation. They are too small for kings, too plain for gods, too oddly placed to be truly royal. Some are unfinished, others recycled, others altogether strange in their design. These are the tombs that shouldn't exist, anomalies in the careful order of Egyptian funerary tradition. And yet, they remain, carved into the cliffs and sands, whispering questions with no certain answers. To the Egyptians, tombs were sacred vessels, meticulously planned to carry the ruler into the afterlife. Great kings often began their tombs at the start of their reign, and the size and quality of the tomb reflected not only their wealth but their stability and length of rule. A well-finished tomb spoke of strength and certainty, but an unfinished or strangely small tomb hinted at disruption. Death came too soon, or power crumbled too quickly, or politics shifted before eternity could be secured. Such tombs bear the imprint of haste. Corridors stop abruptly, walls remain bare, sarcophagi sit in chambers rough-hewn rather than polished. They feel more like abandoned work sites than eternal sanctuaries. One such tomb lies in the Valley of the Kings, KV 55. It is unlike any other. Small, undecorated, and strangely arranged, it has puzzled scholars since its discovery. Within it were fragments of a coffin once richly adorned but later stripped, its face deliberately destroyed. The remains inside sparked debate. Was it Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh erased from history, or Smenkhkare, the mysterious shadow king? The tomb itself seems unworthy of a pharaoh, yet the artifacts point to royal status. KV 55 embodies a strangeness of tombs that don't fit the mold, royal in essence but not in execution. It is a place of contradiction, a tomb that feels both regal and forgotten. There are also tombs that appear to have been reused, adapted from earlier rulers or from non-royal burials. In times of instability, when dynasties fell or power shifted rapidly, tombs were sometimes claimed by new kings who had no time to build their own. Imagine inheriting eternity not in a grand vision of your own making but in a chamber meant for someone else. The walls tell the wrong story, the design follows the wrong symbolism, and yet the body rests there, hoping still to make the journey into the afterlife. These reused tombs feel uncanny, as though the soul inside wears clothes that do not fit. Then there are tombs that stand far from the usual sites. Most expect pharaohs to lie in the Valley of the Kings or in monumental pyramids near Memphis, but some rulers chose, or were forced, to be buried elsewhere. At Amarna, the city of Akhenaten, tombs were carved hastily into cliffs, many left incomplete when the city was abandoned after his death. These tombs feel temporary, experimental, as if their builders knew the place itself would not endure. Walking through them today, one senses a presence both royal and unsettled, a burial ground without roots, a necropolis destined for neglect. The unfinished tombs are perhaps the most haunting. In cliff sides across Egypt, corridors lead a short distance before ending in raw stone. A chamber is sketched but never carved. Decorative outlines remain, never filled with color. It is as if the chisels fell silent overnight. The work is gone, leaving the rock itself to guard what might have been. These tombs should not exist because they were never meant to end that way. They are fragments of eternity, half-built bridges to the afterlife. They speak of rulers whose time ran out before their tombs were ready, or whose names were erased before the work could be completed. The strangeness of these tombs raises questions. Were these pharaohs less powerful, their resources too thin to build properly? Were their reigns so short that even the most skilled artisan could not complete the task? Or were these tombs abandoned deliberately, their construction stopped when politics turned against the ruler? The silence of the chambers offers no certain answers, only speculation. And in that speculation, the mystery deepens. It is easy to imagine walking into one of these strange tombs by lantern light. The walls are rough, the air heavy with dust. Unlike the richly painted passages of Seti I or Ramses VI, there are no god here to guide the king. No protective spells line the walls. Only shadows stretch across stone, leaving you to wonder if the soul entombed within ever found its way to the field of reeds. These spaces feel incomplete not only physically but spiritually, as if the rituals of eternity were interrupted mid-sentence. What makes these tombs most haunting is the contrast they reveal. The Egyptians built with such precision and symbolism, believing that every detail mattered for eternity. To find a tomb that breaks these rules feels unsettling, almost wrong. A pharaoh's burial should be perfect, eternal, unshakable. And yet here we find tombs that contradict those expectations, standing like broken notes in an otherwise harmonious song. They should not exist, and yet they do, reminders that even kings were vulnerable to the failures of time, chance, and politics. These anomalies also remind us that history is not neat. We often picture the past as orderly, with each dynasty following the next, each ruler completing his monuments. But reality was messier. Wars disrupted plans. Sudden deaths forced hurried burials. Successors sought to erase their rivals. The strange tombs are evidence of this messiness. They are scars in the landscape of eternity, proof that even in the age of pharaohs, not all went according to plan. And perhaps these tombs are more honest than the perfect ones. They reveal the truth of mortality, that even kings are not guaranteed smooth passage into eternity. They show that death can arrive too soon, that politics can erase even the most sacred plans, that eternity is fragile. They remind us that beneath the crowns and rituals, pharaohs too were human, subject to the same unpredictability as all people. As we move forward, these tombs that should not exist prepare us to look beyond the Valley of the Kings, to explore burial sites scattered across Egypt. For while the famous tombs tell stories of grandeur, it is the forgotten necropolises, the quiet and remote resting places, that whisper of mystery. These strange tombs are not anomalies alone. They are gateways into deeper questions about power, memory, and the fragility of eternity. And so, we leave the incomplete chambers behind and step toward the wider world of Egypt's forgotten burial grounds, where mystery grows even thicker among the sands. When we think of ancient Egyptian tombs, the mind turns almost automatically to the Valley of the Kings, a place of grandeur, power, and discovery. Its name alone conjures images of golden treasures and secret corridors, of Khata lifting the first stone in Tutankhamun's burial chamber, of mysteries carved in walls that still glow with color centuries later. Yet beyond this celebrated valley lies another Egypt, quieter, almost overlooked. Here are necropolises that once held stories just as significant, but whose voices have grown faint with time. These burial grounds, scattered along cliffs, hidden in deserts, or nestled in towns long since abandoned, are the forgotten landscapes of eternity, valleys beyond kings where history lingers in silence. The Egyptians did not restrict burials to one sacred valley. Every major city had its necropolis, often across the Nile on the western bank, where the setting sun symbolized death and rebirth. Thebes had its Valley of the Kings and Queens, but also countless tombs spread into Deir el-Medina and Dra Abu el-Noga. Memphis had Saqqara, a sprawling complex stretching back to the earliest dynasties. Abydos, sacred to Osiris, drew kings and commoners alike to be buried near the god of the underworld. Each site had its own flavor, its own rituals, its own mysteries. But over centuries, the focus narrowed. Tourists, explorers, and scholars poured attention into a few famous spots, leaving other necropolises to gather dust. Among the most striking of these overlooked burial grounds is Saqqara. Long before the Valley of the Kings, pharaohs were laid to rest here, beneath step pyramids and mastabas. The step pyramid of Djoser, rising like a staircase into eternity, stands as one of the oldest monumental tombs in history. Around it, the desert hides shafts and chambers that belong not only to rulers but also to high officials, priests, and their families. Saqqara was vast, a city of the dead where generations continued to build for over 2,000 years. Walking its sands today, one might stumble upon painted tombs whose colors seem freshly applied, or shafts that plunge deep into darkness where crocodile mummies and sacred bulls were interred. This necropolis was not forgotten by the ancients, but it has been overshadowed in modern memory, its stories quieter but no less haunting. Abydos offers another kind of forgotten eternity. To the Egyptians, Abydos was a gateway to the afterlife, the sacred home of Osiris, god of resurrection. Pilgrims traveled there in life and sought to be buried there in death, hoping to be close to the deity who had conquered mortality. Kings built temples to commemorate their connection with Osiris, and tombs filled the desert nearby. Even rulers buried elsewhere often built cenotaphs at Abydos, symbolic tombs ensuring their link to the god. Today, the sands of Abydos conceal ruins of temples, half-buried stelae, and tomb shafts that feel more like shrines of memory than physical resting places. Unlike the Valley of the Kings, which speaks of earthly glory, Abydos speaks of spiritual yearning. To wander here is to walk among pilgrims who reach for eternity not through wealth, but through devotion. Other forgotten necropolises lie hidden in more unexpected places. In Middle Egypt, cliffs rise above the Nile dotted with openings that lead into tombs of officials and nobles. These tombs lack the treasures of kings, but they tell rich stories through their decorations. Scenes of daily life, fishing, farming, feasting, cover their walls, as if the dead wish to carry not only riches but the very rhythm of existence into the afterlife. To stand in such a tomb is to see eternity painted with humanity's ordinary joys. These tombs rarely attract explorers in search of gold, but they may be even more precious in what they reveal about the lives of those who served the pharaohs. Deir el-Medina, The village of the workers who carved the royal tombs has its own small necropolis. Here the artisans who built eternity for kings built eternity for themselves. Their tombs are modest, but their paintings glow with astonishing beauty, tiny masterpieces that rival the grandest walls of the valley. The workers' tombs remind us that eternity was not reserved for royalty alone. Those who labored with their hands and chisels also dreamed of an afterlife filled with gods, music, and family. Yet their necropolis remains overshadowed, tucked in the shadow of the kings they served. The forgotten necropolises also carry a particular atmosphere. Unlike the Valley of the Kings, which brims with tourists and constant excavation, these sites often feel still, untouched. The wind blows through empty corridors, sand drifts into doorways, birds circle above the cliffs. There is a sense of intimacy here, as if the dead rest undisturbed, their silence respected. It is in these places, away from the grandeur of famous tombs, that one feels closest to the ancient Egyptians, not as distant monarchs, but as people, each hoping to carry something of themselves into the next world. These neglected burial grounds also raise questions. Why did some fade into obscurity while others became legendary? Partly it is the allure of treasure. Saqqara and Abydos were looted long before modern discovery, their riches gone, leaving only stories. Partly it is a shifting of dynasties and capitals, which moved the focus of burial from one city to another. And partly it is chance, which tombs survived intact, which captured the imagination of explorers, which became symbols of Egypt itself. Yet even in obscurity, the forgotten necropolises carry a power of their own, whispering of lives and deaths that mattered in their time, even if history has passed them by. To explore these valleys beyond kings is to widen our understanding of eternity in Egypt. Not every afterlife was gilded with treasure, not every pharaoh rested in a grand chamber. Eternity was sought in many ways. Through devotion at Abydos, through artistry at Deir el-Medina, through daily life scenes in provincial tombs, through shafts cut into the desert at Saqqara. The forgotten necropolises remind us that death was not only for rulers, it was universal, and each soul found its own way to prepare for the unknown. And perhaps, in their quietness, these places hold a deeper kind of mystery than the famous tombs. Without gold to distract, we are left with questions of meaning. Why a farmer painted his oxen on his wall, why a priest carved him to Osiris, why an artisan filled his tomb with music and color. In these details, we glimpse the humanity of those long gone, their hopes not so different from ours. As the sands shift and excavations continue, new discoveries occasionally bring these forgotten necropolises back into light. A painted tomb at Saqqara, a hidden shaft at Abydos, a small chamber at Deir el-Medina, each find reminds us that Egypt still holds secrets, even in places long overshadowed. The Valley of the Kings may hold the world's attention, but beyond it stretches an Egypt of countless tombs, countless stories, countless echoes of eternity. These valleys beyond kings set the stage for what comes next, not only forgotten necropolises, but strange burials themselves, graves where bodies were arranged in ways that defy tradition, where mystery lingers in every gesture of bone and artifact. From the forgotten landscapes, we turn toward the mysteries of the dead themselves, resting in poses that puzzle and unsettle across centuries. In ancient Egypt, death was not merely the end of life, but the beginning of eternity. Every burial carried immense significance, for it was believed that how one was laid to rest determined the soul's journey in the afterlife. The body had to be preserved, the tomb stocked with goods, the rituals performed in precise order. These customs were not casual. They were sacred contract with eternity. Yet, within the sands of Egypt, archaeologists have stumbled upon burials that break these rules. Tombs where bodies are twisted or missing, coffins out of place, chambers that seem to carry whispers of unease. These strange burials do not fit neatly into tradition. They hint at something unsettling, forgotten rituals, political upheaval, or even punishments meant to deny eternity itself. To understand the gravity of this, we must remember that for Egyptians, eternity was everything. A well-prepared tomb ensured that the Ka, the life force, could return to the body. To be buried improperly was more than Dishna. It was annihilation. It meant erasure from both memory and eternity. And yet, scattered across forgotten tombs, there are burials that appear intentionally unusual. They demand explanation, though centuries have obscured the answers. One striking example lies in the Valley of the Kings itself. Tomb KV-55, often linked to the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten or one of his close relatives, is a place of confusion and contradiction. The body discovered inside was hastily mummified, the coffin defaced, the inscriptions erased. The burial seems rushed, incomplete, almost as though the dead were being hidden rather than honored. Was this Akhenaten himself, whose radical devotion to the sun god Aten angered generations? Or was it a disgraced prince caught in the storms of succession? Whoever the occupant was, their strange burial tells of conflict, shame, and a deliberate attempt to deny them the grandeur of eternity. Other unusual burials are found far from the famous valleys. At Amarna, the city of Akhenaten, tombs reveal burials that differ from long-held traditions. Skeletons appear in unusual positions, some crouched rather than lying in the dignified, extended pose. Some bodies show signs of injuries or hasty burial, raising questions about turmoil in the city built for the sun god. Did rebellion sweep through Amarna? Were some buried quickly, without ritual, victims of unrest? Or did Akhenaten's revolution extend even into the way his followers buried their dead? These bodies, twisted in rest, seem to echo the upheaval of a city that defied tradition. In the necropolis of Saqqara, strange burials reveal another kind of mystery. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs where multiple bodies were placed together in ways that defy royal custom. Pharaohs were meant to rest alone, surrounded by treasures for eternity. Yet here, chambers hold more than one skeleton, their arrangement puzzling. Were these burials, bodies moved in secret from looted tombs? Or were they symbolic, meant to bind rulers and priests together in death? In one shaft, skeletons of men, women, and even animals were found intermingled, as if death itself was confused. These strange gatherings suggest rituals now forgotten, beliefs that ran alongside but outside official dogma. Equally perplexing are tombs where evidence of mutilation has been found. Some mummies are missing their heads, hands, or hearts. In ancient belief, such damage could cripple the soul's journey, denying it wholeness in the afterlife. Was this an act of punishment, perhaps for treason or heresy? Or was it a desperate attack by tomb robbers, stripping gold amulets and ornaments from the body with little regard for spiritual consequences? The result is the same, a burial that feels uneasy, unnatural, caught between reverence and violence. To stand in such a tomb is to sense the discomfort of eternity disturbed. Stranger still are the burials that seem too simple for those who bore crowns. Some pharaohs, despite their title, were laid in modest chambers without the grandeur expected of divine rulers. Pharaohs like Smenkhkare, whose reign was short and shadowed, or certain rulers of the intermediate periods, were given resting places that feel incomplete. A small coffin, an undecorated room, or a chamber left unfinished speaks of rulers forgotten even in their own lifetimes. Was this neglect due to political turmoil, or a deliberate attempt to erase their names from history? Such burials remind us that not all kings of Egypt were celebrated. Some were left adrift into obscurity with only fragments of stone to mark their rule. Beyond human burials, the Egyptians also left behind puzzling graves of animals, many of which break tradition. At Saqqara, thousands of mummified animals were found: cats, dogs, ibises, even crocodiles. Some were carefully wrapped and honored, but others were hastily preserved, their bodies showing signs of poor preparation. Why would sacred animals, linked to gods, be treated so inconsistently? Some scholars suggest fraud, that priests sold poorly prepared mummies to pilgrims who believed they were buying offerings to the gods. Others believe these mass burials reflect forgotten rituals, perhaps sacrifices meant to bind communities together in devotion. Whatever the reason, the sight of rows of imperfectly mummified animals speaks of a strange, unsettling side of Egyptian spirituality. These unusual burials remind us that Egypt was never a land of unbroken tradition. Behind the polished image of eternal order lay moments of chaos, rebellion, and change. When bodies are buried strangely, they reflect society in turmoil, a kingdom struggling with faith, power, or memory. Each irregularity is a crack in the smooth surface of eternity, exposing fears and conflicts otherwise hidden. For the listener, there is something haunting about these burials. To imagine a pharaoh laid to rest without honor, or a body crouched unnaturally in its tomb, is to glimpse mortality stripped of certainty. It feels fragile, unsettled, as if even kings could not always secure the eternity they sought. And in that fragility lies a mystery that resonates deeply. because it tells us that no matter how carefully humans plan, death carries secrets that cannot be fully controlled. Yet these strange burials do not erase the humanity of those within. On the contrary, they remind us that every life is vulnerable, even those crowned with gold. They remind us that eternity is not guaranteed, but yearned for, fought for, and sometimes denied. And they remind us that history, like the sands, covers some stories unevenly, leaving us shapes and unsettling whispers behind. As we leave these chambers of twisted bodies and half-forgotten burials, the mystery deepens. For in the shadows of these tombs lie not only questions of death, but also of memory, who chooses what to remember, and why others are left to fade. From strange burials, we turn next to erasures carved in stone, names struck out, faces chiseled away, and legacies deliberately silenced by those who came after. History is not only shaped by what is remembered, but also by what is deliberately forgotten. In ancient Egypt, the power to erase was as mighty as the power to build. Stone was carved with names, images, and prayers to ensure eternity, yet the same stone could be struck with chisels, removing a face, erasing a cartouche, silencing a legacy. To the Egyptians, this was no small act. To remove a name or likeness was to wound the soul itself, to deny the deceased their afterlife. This practice, what modern scholars call damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, was used by kings and priests alike, leaving behind tombs where absence speaks louder than presence. Imagine walking into a burial chamber, its walls covered with delicate carvings of gods and pharaohs. At first, the artistry seems intact, but on closer inspection, the faces of rulers have been hacked away, their names chiseled into oblivion. The rest of the wall remains untouched, offerings to Osiris, hymns to Ra, delicate hieroglyphs of everyday life. Yet where the pharaoh's name should be, there is only a scar in the stone. It is as if eternity itself was denied entry. These erasures are chilling, not because of what is there, but because of what is missing. The most famous example of erasure belongs to Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh. His devotion to the sun god Aten challenged centuries of polytheistic tradition. He closed temples, defied powerful priesthoods, and built a new city devoted to his single god. But after his death, his successors turned against him with fury. His images were destroyed, his cartouches hammered out, his city abandoned to sand. In tombs, where his likeness once stood alongside gods, now only blank walls remain. Akhenaten was denied memory, his revolution wiped from official record. Yet, paradoxically, this attempt at erasure has made him one of the most fascinating figures of Egyptian history, a ghost resurrected by the very absence of his presence. Another victim of erasure was Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. She reigned as pharaoh, donning the false beard and claiming the divine right of kingship in a time when women rarely held such power. Her reign was prosperous, filled with trade, temples, and monuments. Yet after her death, her stepson Thutmose III attempted to erase her legacy. Her images were carved away, her statues broken, her name struck from lists of kings. It was not enough to bury her body. Her memory had to be buried as well. And yet, fragments survived, the faint outline of her face on temple walls, inscriptions half erased but still legible, statues hidden in caches. Hatshepsut, though targeted by erasure, continues to speak through what little remained. These acts of damnatio memoriae were not limited to great figures. Across lesser tombs, archaeologists find names erased, hieroglyphs damaged, or faces chipped away. Sometimes this may have been personal revenge, a rival denying eternity to another. Sometimes it was political, aligning with the shifting winds of power. In certain cases, erasure was punishment for perceived betrayal of the gods or the throne. And sometimes it may have been economic, reusing tombs and coffins by chiseling away old names to inscribe new ones. Each scar in the stone is a reminder that history is contested, written not only in ink and chisel but also in silence and void. Erasure carried spiritual terror for the Egyptians. The name, or Ren, were considered one of the essential parts of the soul. To erase a name was to kill a person a second time, to strip them of their chance at eternal life. Thus, the politics of memory in Egypt were battles not only for earthly legacy but for the afterlife itself. Pharaohs who feared rivals acted not only as kings but as gods deciding eternity. The stakes were cosmic, and the punishments absolute. Yet erasure often failed in its ultimate goal. Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, and others who were condemned in memory are now some of the most studied figures of Egyptian history. In trying to silence them, their enemies ensured their stories would intrigue future generations. The blank walls and defaced statues spark curiosity, drawing explorers and scholars to ask, who was meant to be here? Who was erased? And why? In this way, the absence became louder than presence, and memory returned through mystery. There is also something deeply human in these acts of erasure. They remind us that history is not neat, nor is it fair. It is written by victors, shaped by power, and often distorted to serve the present. Yet the stones keep their secrets. Even when names are scraped away, traces remain, an outline of a hieroglyph, a faint carving in shadow, a record elsewhere that contradicts the silence. Memory, though wounded, is rarely destroyed completely. For the listener, the idea of deliberate forgetting carries a haunting echo. We are reminded that eternity, so carefully sought by the Egyptians, could be undone not by time but by intention. To imagine one's name struck from stone is to imagine being lost not only to life but to remembrance itself. It is a fate that feels colder than death, a silence that chills deeper than any tomb. And yet, in the rhythm of history, there is resilience. Those who were erased still return through fragments, through rediscovery, through curiosity that refuses to let them vanish. Their tombs may be scarred, their images gone, but the mystery they leave behind ensures they are remembered in new ways. The very act of erasure has made them eternal, though not in the way their enemies intended. As we leave the scarred walls of erasure, the story moves deeper into another silence, the tombs themselves. Many of the forgotten resting places remain hidden, still buried beneath sand and rock, untouched since the day they were sealed. In the next chapter, we step into the realm of discovery itself, tracing the moment when explorers and archaeologists opened these sealed doors, revealing forgotten pharaohs and strange tombs that had waited centuries for their story to be told once more. The desert is both a preserver and a concealer. For centuries, its sands have hidden tombs so well that entire dynasties seem to vanish, their rulers remembered only faintly in fragmented king lists or not at all. But time has a way of shifting. Winds move dunes, rains uncover cliffs, and sometimes a farmer's spade strikes stone where no stone should be. The story of Egypt's forgotten tombs is not only about what was buried, but also about how they were found, how silence gave way to rediscovery. These discoveries, often accidental, remind us that history never truly dies. It simply waits for the right moment to rise again. Unlike the grand opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, with its dazzling treasures and international fame, many neglected tombs were uncovered quietly, almost humbly. Some were stumbled upon by locals quarrying stone, others by archaeologists searching for something else entirely. Their entrances were often unmarked, their walls undecorated, their chambers filled not with gold but with dust. Yet within them lay puzzles, unfamiliar names, half-finished hieroglyphs, broken sarcophagi that whispered of forgotten rulers. In their simplicity, these tombs carried a different kind of allure, not of wealth but of mystery. One such discovery came in the cliffs of Dra Abu el-Noga, a necropolis near Thebes. Here, archaeologists uncovered tombs belonging to rulers of the 17th dynasty, a dynasty that bridged Egypt's second intermediate period and the rise of the New Kingdom. These kings, such as Seqenenre-Dao and Kamose, were not buried with the splendor of later pharaohs. Their tombs were modest, some little more than rock-cut chambers. Yet their significance is immense. They were the leaders who fought against the Hyksos invaders, paving the way for Egypt's reunification. Within their simple burials lay broken weapons, signs of violent deaths, and coffins bearing hastily written names. These finds did not dazzle with gold but with story, narratives of struggle, courage, and sacrifice. In Saqqara, the desert has yielded a different kind of rediscovery. Tomb shafts sealed for millennia have been opened to reveal collections of mummies stacked together, some royal, some priestly, others perhaps common. In 2020, dozens of colorful coffins were uncovered in near-perfect condition, their painted faces staring back as if untouched by time. Many of these belonged not to the famous dynasties but to later, less celebrated periods of Egyptian history. For centuries, scholars overlooked these eras, focusing instead on the so-called Golden Ages. Yet the coffins of Saqqara remind us that devotion to eternity never ceased, even when dynasties changed and power waned. Every coffin is a life, a story, a thread in the great tapestry of Egypt. Sometimes rediscovery comes not in the form of intact tombs, but through fragments. At Abydos, the sacred city of Osiris, explorers uncovered cenotaphs, symbolic tombs built by kings whose real bodies rested elsewhere. These were not burial chambers filled with mummies, but empty shrines meant to secure the pharaoh's spiritual presence near Osiris. When first uncovered, they puzzled archaeologists. Why build a tomb with no body? Why carve corridors leading to empty rooms? The answer lies in faith, the desire to be remembered not only in one place, but in many. Rediscovering these cenotaphs expanded our understanding of eternity in Egypt, showing that memory itself could be multiplied. Even more curious are the tombs that were started but never finished. In the Valley of the Kings and elsewhere, corridors suddenly end in rough stone, as if workers abandoned their chisels mid-task. These tombs, rediscovered centuries later, seem frozen in time. Were they abandoned because a pharaoh died too soon? Or because politics shifted, leaving the ruler without the resources to finish? To step inside one of these half-made tombs is to feel the weight of incompletion, the sense of a story interrupted. Rediscoveries like these highlight the fragility of power, even among kings who claim to be divine. For the modern world, rediscoveries are also stories of perseverance. Generations of archaeologists have combed the deserts, guided by fragments of papyrus, whispers of local lore, or the faint trace of a wall jutting from sand. Each discovery, no matter how small, adds another piece of the puzzle of forgotten pharaohs. Sometimes the finds are overlooked in their own right, small statues, broken pottery, faded inscriptions, but together they weave forgotten names back into history. The forgotten pharaohs do not return in golden splendor, but in these fragile remnants that demand patient listening. There is also poetry in the way rediscoveries mirror the beliefs of the Egyptians themselves. They believed in rebirth, in resurrection, in the return of light after darkness. And so, too, their tombs return to light after centuries in shadow. To imagine a chamber sealed in the time of the Middle Kingdom, untouched until a lantern flickered within it in the 19th or 20th century, is to feel the rhythm of resurrection that Egypt has always promised. The dead may be forgotten, but the desert does not forget forever. For the listener, these discoveries offer a dreamlike quality. One can picture explorers brushing sand from a doorway, prying open a slab of stone, and stepping into a chamber where it has not stirred in 3,000 years. Inside, perhaps a wooden coffin lies in fragments, or a painted wall glows faintly in lamplight, or a small amulet rests in the dust. These moments are not loud, not dazzling, but intimate, connections across centuries when the forgotten pharaohs are no longer alone. Yet rediscovery also brings questions. Why were these tombs neglected in the first place? Why did some remain hidden while others were robbed and stripped bare? Were they overlooked because they belonged to rulers of troubled times, kings whose reigns were not celebrated? Or were they deliberately concealed, sealed away by successors who wished their memory gone? Rediscovery does not always bring answers. It often deepens a mystery. For with each tomb opened, we realize how many more remain buried, waiting for the right moment to be found. As we leave these stories of rediscovery, the narrative turns toward the builders themselves, the men and women who carve eternity into stone, who dug corridors in darkness, who painted walls with scenes of gods and kings. For the forgotten pharaohs and their strange tombs cannot be understood without those who created them. In the next chapter, we descend into the world of tomb builders and artisans, whose lives and labors shape the silent chambers we explore today. When we speak of pharaohs and their tombs, we often picture kings and queens, gods and rituals, golden treasures and eternal sleep. Yet behind every tomb lies another story, quieter but no less important, the story of the hands that built them. For the forgotten pharaohs, whose resting places were modest or incomplete, the artisans and builders are even more essential to understanding their mystery. These were the men who dug in darkness, who shaped stone into passageways, who painted scenes meant to last forever. Their lives, though rarely recorded, are written in the walls they carved. To step back into their world is to enter Deir el-Medina, the small village on the west bank of the Nile, not far from the Valley of the Kings. This settlement, founded for the workers of the new kingdom, is one of the best preserved glimpses into the lives of tomb builders. Here lived the craftsmen, painters, and stone cutters who labored under the desert sun by day and returned to their modest homes by night. Their lives were not grand, yet they were deeply connected to the eternal fates of kings. In their wake, They carried the weight of divine responsibility to create homes for the dead that would endure as long as the stars. The artisans were highly skilled, often working in family lines, where knowledge of carving or pigment making was passed from father to son. Their tools were simple: chisels, wooden mallets, brushes made of reeds, but in their hands, stone became story and pigment became memory. Even in tombs of forgotten pharaohs, where grandeur was lacking, the artistry is often breathtaking. Delicate hieroglyphs, careful lines of text, symbols of gods drawn with reverence. These quiet details, sometimes overlooked by the eye of treasure seekers, are testaments to a devotion that outlived both the builders and the kings they served. But life for these artisans was not without hardship. The work was grueling, often carried out in cramped spaces where torches smoked and dust clung to the lungs. Heat pressed down, and silence was broken only by the tap of tools. They were watched over by foremen, who ensured that every stroke aligned with sacred design. A mistake was not merely an error of craft, it was a spiritual misstep, for the tomb was more than a chamber. It was a map for eternity. Precision mattered, for every symbol was a prayer, every scene a guide for the soul of the pharaoh to find its way to the gods. In Deir el-Medina, records scratched on ostraca, broken pieces of pottery, reveal the humanity of these builders. They wrote about their families, their disputes, their hunger, their hopes. One worker might complain of a shortage of grain, another might record the birth of a child. Some scribbled jokes, others drew sketches of animals or gods in playful poses. Through these fragments, we hear their voices across millennia, reminding us that the tombs were not only made for kings, they were made by people who laughed, who worried, who dreamed. For the forgotten pharaohs, the artisan's role takes on added poignancy. If a king's reign was short, the builders often had little time to complete his resting place. Many tombs show signs of hurried work: corridors roughly cut, decorations left unfinished, coffins inscribed with names written hastily. In some cases, artisans may have reused older materials, carving over another's inscription to fit the new ruler. These acts speak not only to practicality but to the fragile nature of kingship itself, where even a pharaoh's eternity could depend on the hands of a craftsman pressed by time. Among the workers, there were those who carried secrets. To build a tomb was to know its layout, its hidden chambers, its concealed doors. This knowledge was dangerous, for it could tempt robbery or betrayal. For this reason, artisans often lived in guarded communities, watched to ensure loyalty. Yet history records instances of strikes and protests, where builders, unpaid or unfed, laid down their tools. Even those tasked with shaping eternity were subject to the struggles of the moment. The tombs of forgotten pharaohs, with their unfinished corridors and modest scale, may in part reflect such human tensions, where devotion met reality. The artistry of these builders also reflected a worldview. Scenes of daily life carved on tomb walls, farmers plowing, women baking bread, fishermen casting nets, were not random decorations. They were promises, images meant to become real in the afterlife. The artisans, in painting these visions, were not only serving the king, they were shaping his eternity. Even in tombs without gold, where treasures were sparse, these painted scenes glow with meaning. For the pharaohs who might otherwise be forgotten, the art of their builders preserves something greater than wealth: the texture of life itself. It is easy to imagine one of these artisans, kneeling in the flicker of a lamp, brush in hand, carefully painting the Eye of Horus onto a wall. Perhaps he knew the name of the pharaoh whose tomb he decorated. Perhaps he cared little, focusing instead on the perfection of his craft. Yet unknowingly, his work became the bridge across centuries, the reason we remember a king otherwise lost to time. The builders, though unnamed in most records, are the guardians of memory. Without them, the forgotten pharaohs would be truly lost. Even the imperfections tell a story. In some tombs, hieroglyphs are misspelled, proportions slightly skewed. A hurried chisel stroke cuts deeper than intended. A pigment fades unevenly. These small flaws remind us that the builders were human, not divine, and in their humanity lies the beauty of their work, the knowledge that eternity was built not by gods, but by hands roughened by labor, by eyes strained in the half-darkness of tomb corridors. For the listener, to imagine the world of these artisans is to hear a different rhythm of Egypt, not the roar of armies or the glitter of festivals, but the steady, patient tapping of chisels against stone, a rhythm of creation, of devotion, of lives lived in service of memory. Their village, their tools, their laughter, and fatigue. All these shape the tombs as much as the names of the kings did. In the silence of a neglected chamber, when we trace a painted symbol with our eyes, we are touching not only the story of a pharaoh, but the legacy of those who built for him. And so, as we leave the tomb builders behind, we turn once more to the kings themselves. For even with artisan skill, eternity required more than stone and paint. It required faith. The forgotten pharaohs, like their grander counterparts, placed their trust in rituals, spells, and the guiding hand of the gods. In the next section, we journey into the heart of their belief, the rituals of burial, the ceremonies of passage, and the eternal prayers whispered into stone. If tombs were the houses of eternity, then the rituals of burial were the keys that unlocked their doors. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end but a passage, a delicate crossing from the world of sunlight into the unseen realm of gods and spirits. Every pharaoh, whether celebrated or forgotten, required ceremonies to ensure safe passage. These rituals, elaborate and layered with meaning, served as bridges between life and eternity. Yet for the lesser-known rulers, whose reigns were fleeting and whose names barely survived the centuries, these rites often reveal a poignant tension between tradition and neglect. In grand accounts, such as those describing the burials of great pharaohs like Seti I or Ramesses II, we imagine vast processions, priests chanting prayers, mourners wailing, and sacred objects carried in solemn procession to the tomb. Incense would fill the air, sweet and heavy, rising toward the gods as if carrying the soul of the king with it. Sacred oils, poured upon the body, symbolized purification and rebirth. Spells from the Book of the Dead would be recited, guiding the departed spirit through the dangers of the underworld. Yet for the forgotten pharaohs, the ceremonies were often shorter, less resplendent, hurried as if history itself was reluctant to pause. The preparation of the body was the most critical act, for without preservation, the spirit could not endure. The process of mummification was both science and faith, an art developed over centuries. Skilled embalmers removed the organs, treated the flesh with natron salts, wrapped the body in linen, and adorned it with protective amulets. Each act carried symbolic weight. The heart preserved to house memory, the eyes protected to see the gods, the mouth prepared to speak in the afterlife. Even in modest burials, the essential rituals had to be performed. To neglect them was to risk the eternal annihilation of the soul, a fate more terrifying than death itself. But here we encounter mystery. Some forgotten pharaohs, discovered in poorly made tombs or scattered caches of bodies, show signs of incomplete embalming. Bones sometimes charred by hurried or faulty processes, bodies missing protective amulets, wrappings uneven or unfinished. What do these signs tell us? Were resources too scarce to complete the ceremonies? Were these rulers abandoned by officials who saw little value in their remembrance? Or did hurried political transitions cut short the time for ritual? The evidence is fragmentary, but in these fragments, we glimpse the vulnerability of kings who lived in shadows even in death. Central to every burial was the opening of the mouth ceremony. In this rite, a priest, often wearing the mask of Anubis, would touch sacred tools to the lips of the mummy, symbolically restoring the senses of the deceased. To open the mouth was to grant the king breath, speech, and sustenance in the afterlife. Without this act, the pharaoh could not eat, speak, or pray in eternity. For forgotten kings, this ritual may have been carried out in quieter spaces, with fewer attendants, perhaps only a handful of priests performing words almost swallowed by silence. Yet even in diminished form, the ritual held power. It shows that even rulers of little renown were still woven into the sacred fabric of belief. Offerings were another key element. Food, drink, perfumes, and clothing were presented before the tomb to nourish the spirit of the pharaoh. In the grandest burials, these offerings were vast and varied: honey, beer, figs, cattle, and jars of fine oils. But for forgotten kings, often the offerings were modest. A few jars of grain, a simple jug of water, perhaps a small loaf of bread placed reverently by a priest's hand. What matters here is not the abundance, but the intention. Even the humblest gifts were believed to sustain a soul on its journey. The journey to the tomb itself was a ritual of transition. The body, carried on a sacred bark or bier, would be transported from the place of embalming across the Nile to the West Bank, where the sun set and the land of the dead began. This crossing was heavy with symbolism. The West was the direction of death, the realm where I traveled each night. Processions of forgotten kings may have been short and sparsely attended, yet still, the act of crossing bound them into the eternal cycle of sun and shadow. The tomb sealing was a final, solemn act. Once the body and offerings were placed within, priests performed incantations, and heavy stones were rolled into place. To seal the tomb was to set the pharaoh on his eternal journey. Yet in many of the forgotten tombs we find today, evidence shows that seals were broken soon after burial. Looters, or even officials desperate for resources, entered quickly. The rituals that had been so carefully performed were undone, the sanctity of the burial violated. For these rulers, eternity was fragile, threatened not only by time but by the greed and neglect of their own people. Still, the rituals left echoes. Even in stripped tombs, fragments of linen wrappings, traces of resin, or the faint scent of incense clinging to the stones remind us of ceremonies once performed. Every small remnant speaks of belief, of a society that, even when hurried or impoverished, clung to the conviction that death was not an end. For forgotten kings, these traces are whispers, faint but enduring, that keep their memory alive when history has otherwise passed them by. It is moving to consider how much care was given even when circumstances were dire. Imagine a priest in the dim light of dusk, standing over a hastily prepared body, murmuring words of ancient spells. Perhaps he knew this pharaoh would not be remembered, that his tomb lacked grandeur, that his name might be erased by time. Yet still, he performed the rites. Still, he called on the gods to guide the king's soul. It is in these quiet, faithful gestures that the humanity of Egypt's rituals shines most brightly. The rituals of burial were not merely for the pharaoh, they were also for the living. Each act reinforced the cosmic order, the balance of life and death, the eternal link between gods and men. By performing the rites, priests and mourners reaffirmed the truth that Egypt itself endured. Thus, even the forgotten kings served a role. Their burials, humble as they were, maintained the cycle, ensured that the world continued to turn under the gaze of the gods. As we leave the shadow of these ceremonies, one question lingers. What did the Egyptians truly believe awaited their kings in the next world? What dangers, what trials, what promises fill their vision of eternity? To answer this, we must journey deeper, beyond the rituals themselves, into the imagined landscape of the afterlife. For the forgotten pharaohs, like their grander peers, the hope of eternity lay not in wealth or stone, but in the power of belief in the mysteries of the unseen realm. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was not a vague or distant concept. It was a place as vivid and real as the world they lived in, a vast landscape filled with rivers, fields, mountains, and gates guarded by gods and spirits. Every pharaoh, whether a mighty ruler or a forgotten king lost to time, was destined to travel through this unseen realm. To step into death was to embark on a journey more dangerous and more significant than any battle or conquest in life. And it was this journey, above all else, that shaped the construction of tombs, the rituals of burial, and the countless prayers written in hieroglyphs on walls and coffins. The Egyptian afterlife was called the Duat, a shadowy, mysterious place where the sun god Ra sailed each night. In their beliefs, the dead pharaoh joined Ra on this journey, sailing through darkness, facing enemies, and emerging with the dawn. This vision gave hope to both kings and commoners. Death was not an end, but a cycle, a transformation, a rebirth into eternity. Yet the road to that eternity was perilous, filled with gates that needed passwords, demons that needed appeasing, and trials that tested the soul's worth. For great pharaohs, entire texts like the Amduat or the Book of Gates were inscribed on tomb walls, maps of the afterlife to guide their souls. These writings described each stage of the Duat, each hour of night, with detailed instructions on how to pass safely. For forgotten kings, whose tombs were smaller or unfinished, fragments of these texts sometimes remain, half-finished passages, brief inscriptions on coffins, or simple prayers hurriedly painted onto stone. Even in their modest form, these fragments reveal the same deep longing, that the king's soul would not wander lost, but find its way through the darkness toward the eternal sunrise. The journey began with judgment. The heart of the deceased was weighed on the scales of Maat, the goddess of truth, against the feather of justice. If the heart were heavier, burdened by sin or dishonesty, it was devoured by the monstrous goddess part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. For a pharaoh, this trial carried immense weight. A king was not only a man, but the embodiment of divine order. His heart, judged by the gods, symbolized not only his life but his reign. Even the forgotten kings, though their names faded, would have been envisioned in this ritual, standing before Osiris, the ruler of the underworld, awaiting their eternal fate. If the judgment was favorable, the pharaoh moved forward into the afterlife's fields. These fields, known as the Field of Reeds, were the paradise of Egyptian belief, a place of endless harvests, flowing rivers, cool breezes, and the company of loved ones. It was not a world of idle rest, but a continuation of life's joys, perfected and eternal. For pharaohs, it was also a place of kingship renewed. There, they ruled again, side by side with the gods, bathed in light and order. To reach this paradise was the hope of every ritual, the aim of every spell, the reason tombs were built with such care. But the journey was never simple. Along the way, the pharaoh's soul faced obstacles, fiery lakes, serpent demons, gates guarded by fearsome beings who demanded secret names and words of power. The tomb texts functioned like travel guides, filled with these words, ensuring that the soul could answer correctly and move forward. Even in the simplest burials, spells scratched onto pottery shards or written hastily on linen served the same purpose. They were passwords to the dead, a language of protection against the unknown. For the forgotten kings, these fragments may have been their only shield as they crossed the perilous realms of night. It is haunting to imagine a king, stripped of grandeur in life, moving through the afterlife with only half-finished maps and hurried prayers. Yet perhaps this makes their journey even more poignant. In their vulnerability, they remind us that the afterlife was not guaranteed by wealth or monuments. It was secured by faith, by ritual, by the belief that the gods were just and that even a forgotten king could find his place among them. The Egyptian vision of eternity was not solitary. The dead were joined by their ancestors, their loved ones, their gods. They were given servants in the form of sharp-teeth figurines, small statues buried in the tomb, meant to perform labor for the king in the afterlife. Some forgotten kings had only a handful of these figures, crudely made and unadorned. Yet even these humble companions held power, for they carried the magical inscriptions that bound them to eternal service. In this way, the smallest of objects ensured that no king, no matter how forgotten, would walk through eternity alone. Another striking element of the afterlife journey is the presence of Ra, the sun god. Each night, Ra descended into the duat, battling the great serpent Apophis, the embodiment of chaos. Each dawn, Ra emerged victorious, reborn as a rising sun. To be united with Ra was the greatest destiny a pharaoh could hope for. In life, kings called themselves sons of Ra. In death, they sought to merge with his eternal cycle. The forgotten pharaohs, too, were included in this vision. Though their tombs may not shine like those of their grander peers, their belief was the same, to rise each morning with the sun, reborn forever. The afterlife, then, was both comforting and terrifying. It promised paradise, but only through trials. It offered eternity, but only if one's soul was pure and prepared. This duality reflects the Egyptian worldview itself, a balance between order and chaos, light and darkness, life and death. For the listener, this journey invites quiet reflection. To imagine the forgotten pharaohs traveling through the duat is to see them not as nameless rulers lost in history, but as souls, like ours, seeking peace and light after struggle. When archaeologists open a forgotten tomb and find fragments of these beliefs, scraps of text, painted gods, broken amulets, they are not just uncovering artifacts. They are witnessing the hopes of the dead. They are seeing the invisible path those kings believed they would walk. Even when time erases names and crumbles stone, the vision of the afterlife remains, an eternal horizon, a promise of dawn beyond the longest night. As we step out of this vision of eternity, we return to the earth, to the living world, where tombs lay hidden and waiting. The afterlife may have been the ultimate destination, but it is a discovery of their resting places in modern times that has breathed new memory into the forgotten kings. In the next section, we will follow the footsteps of explorers and archaeologists whose lanterns pierce the darkness of sealed chambers, bringing the silent tombs back into the light of history. The tombs of Egypt, sealed in silence for millennia, lay hidden beneath sand, stone, and shadow. They waited patiently, untouched by human eyes, their stories preserved in darkness. When they were first built, they were meant to last forever, houses of eternity, designed to hold kings in peace until the end of time. Yet eternity was interrupted. Looters entered, sandstorms buried, memory faded. Many pharaohs became little more than whispers in broken inscriptions. It was not until centuries later, with the rise of modern archaeology, that these forgotten rulers began to stir again, their tombs rediscovered by curious hands and lantern light. The rediscovery of tombs is as much a story of persistence as it is of chance. In the early centuries, travelers from Greece and Rome wandered among the ruins, marveling at the colossal statues and crumbling temples. They wrote of wonders, but often misunderstood what they saw. Later, during the Middle Ages, the monuments of Egypt were shrouded in myth. Tombs became places of legend, rumored to hold unimaginable treasures or forbidden magic. By the 19th century, however, curiosity shifted from legend to science. Adventurers, scholars, and treasure seekers flocked to the Nile, eager to unearth the past. Yet the rediscovery of forgotten pharaohs was not like the spectacular unveiling of Tutankhamun's tomb, filled with gold and splendor. Instead, it was quieter, more fragmentary. A broken wall here, a half-buried shaft there, bones wrapped in tattered linen, inscriptions carved with names half erased by time. Each discovery added a small piece to a larger puzzle, and often the pieces did not fit neatly. Some tombs were found looted long ago, their treasures gone. Others were unfinished, their walls bare, their corridors abruptly ending. For archaeologists, these empty or modest chambers held no less wonder, for they revealed the humanity of Egypt's forgotten rulers, the kings who lived briefly, ruled quietly, and passed into obscurity. One striking example is the Valley of the Kings, where the tombs of both great and minor pharaohs lie side by side. As explorers moved through its cliffs and ravines, they stumbled upon tombs whose names barely survived in history. Some were little more than single chambers carved into the rock, decorated with only a few lines of text. In others, archaeologists found coffins reused from older burials, a sign of hurried preparation. These discoveries spoke not of wealth but of vulnerability, of rulers who were buried with dignity but not with grandeur. The rediscovery process itself was often painstaking. Workers with picks and brushes cleared away centuries of sand. Archaeologists lowered themselves by rope into shafts filled with stale air. By the light of lanterns, they revealed paintings and inscriptions that had not been seen for thousands of years. In many cases, they found tombs already violated, their treasures gone, their mummies disturbed. Yet even in these violated spaces, the atmosphere was haunting. The walls still spoke, the colors still glowed faintly, and the silence still carried the weight of eternity. One of the most moving aspects of these rediscoveries is the reappearance of names. In ancient Egypt, to erase a name was to condemn a soul to oblivion. Many forgotten pharaohs had their names scratched out, lost in the shifting politics of succession. When archaeologists brushed away dust and revealed a hieroglyph once more, they were not only uncovering history, they were giving a king back his identity. In that moment, a ruler who had been nameless for centuries was remembered again. Not all rediscoveries were celebrated immediately. Some tombs, lacking treasure, were dismissed in early explorations as unimportant. Their simple walls and broken coffins did not dazzle those seeking gold. Yet over time, scholars came to see that these tombs were just as valuable. They offered insight into periods of turmoil, short reigns, or shifts in religious belief. They told stories of Egypt not in its grandeur but in its fragility. And in that fragility, they revealed a truth about all civilizations, that greatness and obscurity often walk side by side. There is also the mystery of rediscovery itself. How many tombs remain hidden beneath desert sands, still untouched? Egyptologists estimate that many more lie buried, their entrances concealed by rockfalls or drifting dunes. Each new discovery carries with it the thrill of possibility. Could it be the resting place of another forgotten king? Could a name erased from memory once again rise into the light? In this way, rediscovery becomes not just a process of archaeology, but of resurrection, a bringing back to life, however briefly, of those who have slept for millennia. For listeners, there is something deeply calming in imagining these rediscoveries. Picture an archaeologist brushing away sand to reveal a carved falcon, its lines still sharp after 3,000 years. Imagine the flicker of a candle in a painted chamber, colors glowing faintly in the dim light. Feel the stillness of a corridor, where silence has reigned for centuries, disturbed only now by careful footsteps. These are moments of connection between past and present, where time collapses and we stand face to face with the world of the forgotten pharaohs. The rediscovery of tombs also carries an element of respect. Modern archaeology, though born from treasure-seeking, has shifted toward preservation. Today, when a forgotten tomb is opened, the aim is not to remove its contents but to study and protect them. Tombs are documented, their walls photographed, their inscriptions carefully copied. Some are left sealed after study, to preserve their fragile artwork. In this way, rediscovery has become less about taking and more about honoring. And so, in the rediscovery of these forgotten tombs, we find a paradox. The kings themselves were not remembered by their people, their names faded, their monuments buried. Yet through modern curiosity, they are remembered once more. Their tombs, though modest, have become part of a larger story, the story of Egypt itself, a civilization whose memory endures through both grandeur and silence. From here, our journey shifts. We have seen the forgotten pharaohs in life, in death, in ritual, and in rediscovery. But what do these fragments truly mean for us today? How do the lives of forgotten kings speak to a modern world so far removed from the Nile? In the next section, we turn to interpretation, asking what the legacy of these quiet rulers can teach us about memory, time, and the fragile nature of history itself. The forgotten kings of Egypt may not shine in gold, nor stand in the great temples remembered by the ages, yet their stories whisper lessons that remain timeless. In their quiet reigns and modest tombs, we find reflections of humanity, lessons about memory, ambition, fragility, and the nature of legacy. While grand rulers like Ramses or Tutankhamun are celebrated in monuments and museums, these obscure pharaohs reveal something different, a more intimate truth about the fleetingness of power and the delicate thread by which history holds onto a name. The first lesson is one of impermanence. Many of the forgotten kings ruled briefly, sometimes only for months or a year. Their reigns were swept away by stronger successors, their names erased by rivals, their monuments left incomplete. Yet even in their obscurity, they remind us that power is never permanent. No matter how grand the throne, time eventually claims its hold. This is not a message of despair, but a perspective. The forgotten pharaohs show that all things, even kingdoms, are temporary. What endures is not the weight of crowns, but the continuity of the human story itself. The second lesson is resilience. Though their tombs were small and their inscriptions simple, they still sought to preserve their memory. Even in the face of uncertainty, they carved their names, painted their walls, and prepared for eternity as best they could. These small acts of resilience, etching hieroglyphs into stone, weaving prayers into papyrus, carry across millennia. They teach us that even modest efforts to leave a mark can survive. A ruler without armies or monuments still reaches across time because they tried, however quietly, to be remembered. Another lesson lies in humility. The forgotten kings remind us that greatness is not always measured in splendor. Their tombs lack the towering pylons of Karnak or the gold of Tutankhamun, yet their humanity shines through. In their quiet burials, we see that legacy is not about wealth alone. It is about being part of a larger story, contributing even a small verse to the grand epic of civilization. For the modern world, where success is often measured in scale, the forgotten pharaohs remind us of the value in small but meaningful contributions. There is also a lesson about memory and the fragile nature of remembrance. To the Egyptians, to have one's name spoken was to live eternally. Many of these kings lost that privilege, erased, ignored, or forgotten. Yet centuries later, archaeologists rediscover their names, brushing away dust to reveal hieroglyphs hidden for thousands of years. The lesson here is profound. Even when forgotten, memory can return. What we do in life may fade, but it may also reemerge unexpectedly, given new meaning by those who come after. Our legacies are not only what we leave, but what others choose to see in them. The forgotten pharaohs also teach us about balance between power and vulnerability. Unlike the great kings who projected strength through massive temples, these rulers often reveal the fragility of their time. Their reigns coincided with periods of unrest, shifting dynasties, or economic strain. In their stories, we see how power can be unstable, how kingdoms rise and fall, and how even rulers sit on uncertain thrones. For us today, their lesson is clear. No system, however mighty, is unshakable. To survive, one must adapt, just as these rulers did in their brief but significant ways. There is also a spiritual lesson. The forgotten kings still place their hope in eternity. They may have lacked the wealth to build vast tombs, but they believe, as all Egyptians did, that the afterlife was a true kingdom. Their simple coffins, their painted prayers, and their modest offerings show a faith that transcended politics. In this way, they remind us that belief and meaning often matter more than material wealth. They trusted in something beyond themselves, a vision of eternity that gave even their short reigns purpose. Perhaps the most poignant lesson of all is empathy. When we look at the great monuments, it is easy to be dazzled by size and power. But when we stand in a small, half-finished tomb, carved hastily for a forgotten king, we are reminded of human vulnerability. These rulers lived with hopes, fears, and uncertainties just as we do. Their struggles were not so different from ours, seeking stability, meaning, and remembrance. Through them, we see the humanity behind the crown, and in that recognition, we find empathy across time. There is also a lesson in patience. The forgotten kings waited silently in their tomb for thousands of years, unnoticed. And yet, eventually, the sand shifted, and their stories emerged again. In this, they remind us that truth does not always reveal itself immediately. Sometimes, it takes centuries for meaning to be seen, for voices to be heard. The patience of these silent tombs teaches us that even if recognition comes late, it still carries weight when it arrives. For the modern world, the forgotten pharaohs hold one final lesson, that greatness is not always loud. In an age filled with noise, speed, and constant remembrance, their quiet reigns whisper gently. They suggest that to live meaningfully does not always require glory, fame, or monuments. Sometimes, the greatest legacies are those hidden in small acts of faith, resilience, and humanity. As we reach the close of our journey, the desert night settles like a soft curtain, and the echoes of Egypt's forgotten pharaohs linger in the air. We have walked with them through dimly lit corridors, traced the hieroglyphs of their names, and paused beside their modest resting places. Though their reigns were brief and their monuments humble, their stories have carried us across millennia, reminding us that history is not only written in stone, but also in silence, patience, and rediscovery. These kings, once consigned to the shadows, rise again, not in the thunder of armies or the brilliance of gold, but in the gentle rhythm of remembrance. The great monuments of Egypt, the pyramids, the vast temples, the statues towering above the sands, often dominate the imagination. Yet, there is a quiet truth in the tombs of the forgotten rulers, that eternity is not measured in size, but in endurance. Their chambers may be small, their treasures meager, but the fact that we speak of them tonight, after thousands of years, is proof of a different kind of immortality. It is not the immortality of fame, but of rediscovery, of voices carried gently back into the light after lying in silence. The echoes of these pharaohs reach us like whispers across time. They remind us that history itself is like the Nile, sometimes flowing swiftly, carrying names and deeds into a wide sea of memory, and at other times meandering slowly, leaving behind eddies where smaller stories rest, waiting to be found. These forgotten rulers are part of those quieter eddies. They waited, patient beneath the sand, until the moment came when hands brushed away the dust, eyes read their inscriptions, and hearts remembered them once more. There is a calm reassurance in their stories, for in their fragility we see a reflection of ourselves. Few of us will leave behind great monuments or vast legacies. Most of us, like the forgotten kings, will live lives of modest impact, known intimately by those around us, but not by all. Yet, this does not lessen the meaning of a life lived. The pharaohs' tombs, no matter how small, still held prayers, still carried symbols of care and belief, still reached toward eternity. And so, too, our small acts of love, our quiet contributions, our names spoken softly by those who remember us, carry meaning that cannot be erased. As we look back upon this journey, the contrast between the grand and the humble becomes clear. The known pharaohs, with their golden treasures and massive temples, shine brightly in history. But brightness can fade, even great monuments weather and fall. The forgotten pharaohs, in their obscurity, carry another lesson, that endurance is sometimes found in quietness. They survive not by grandeur, but by patience, by the steadfast hope that even the smallest memory can survive the weight of centuries. There is also a mystery that remains. How many more names still lie beneath the sands? How many more kings and queens, priests and builders, await discovery? Egypt continues to yield secrets, year after year, as archaeologists open tombs and unearth forgotten objects. Each discovery expands the story, reminding us that history is never complete. The echoes of eternity are not finished. They continue to emerge, reshaping what we know and deepening the mystery that draws us still toward the desert. Perhaps the greatest gift the forgotten pharaohs offer us is perspective. They remind us that power is fragile, memory is fleeting, and yet humanity endures. To be forgotten is not the same as to be lost. Their names, once silent, now speak again. Their tombs, once sealed, are open with reverence. Their lives, once small on the grand stage of Egypt, are now told with care, in the calm of a bedtime story, where they find a new kind of immortality, not in the temples of stone, but in the minds of those who listen. As the desert night deepens, imagine standing before one of their tombs. The sand is cool beneath your feet, the stars scatter endlessly above, and the walls around you carry symbols carved by hands long gone. In that stillness, you hear not silence, but a whisper, a reminder that every life, however humble, matters. Every story, however faint, deserves its place in the great river of history. And though time may bury it, patience and curiosity will one day bring it back to light. The journey is nearly complete, and the desert lies once more in silence. Night has fully embraced the Nile, and the sands stretch endlessly beneath a sky scattered with stars. In this stillness, we reflect on the forgotten pharaohs one last time. Their names, once nearly lost to history, have drifted through our imagination, carried on the quiet wind of memory. We have walked through corridors carved in stone, traced faint hieroglyphs, and stood at the edge of chambers where time itself seems to sleep. And now, as we prepare to leave them, we allow their presence to linger softly in the mind, like a final echo fading gently into the night. There is something profoundly calming in knowing that these kings, once overlooked, are no longer silent. Tonight, their lives were spoken, their tombs remembered, their stories shared. Even in their obscurity, they have left something behind, not through grand monuments, but through the persistence of history and the curiosity of those who seek. They remind us that memory can be fragile, yet also enduring. What is buried may rise again. What is forgotten may return to light. The night itself becomes a mirror of their story. Darkness covers the desert, yet within it, countless stars shimmer quietly, each a reminder that even in vast obscurity, small lights endure. So too did the forgotten pharaohs shine in their own way, faint but present, their existence never entirely erased. And as we gaze upon the heavens, we feel the same vastness of time and space that they once looked upon. They, too, saw the stars and wondered about eternity. We, centuries later, share that same wonder. In this way, the distance between us and them narrows. There is also comfort in their humility. Not every ruler is remembered in gold, and not every story is carved in towering stone. Yet meaning does not always come with grandeur. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in fragments, in the gentle discovery of what was once overlooked. The forgotten pharaohs remind us that even lives without glory hold weight, that memory is not only for the powerful but for all who leave behind even the faintest trace of themselves. As the night deepens, imagine the desert in stillness. The winds carry fine grains of sand across the land, shaping dunes that rise and fall like waves frozen in time. Beneath them rest countless secrets, names, objects, live still waiting to be uncovered. Egypt holds more mysteries than we can ever know. Yet, in each discovery, there is a reminder that the past is never entirely lost. It waits, quietly, for the right moment to return. And when it does, it speaks not only of those who lived long ago, but also of us, our need to remember, to connect, to honor what came before. In reflecting on the forgotten pharaohs, we also reflect on ourselves. We wonder how memory will treat us, what of our own lives will remain centuries from now. Perhaps nothing we build will survive, yet perhaps, like these rulers, small traces, our words, our creations, our names, may endure in ways we cannot imagine. The pharaohs remind us that even obscurity holds a form of immortality. To be remembered at all, even briefly, is to live again. And so we close our story where it began, in the desert, at night, with mystery and silence as companions. The forgotten pharaohs now return to their eternal rest, their tombs quiet once more, their names drifting back into the sands of time. But they are no longer alone in silence. For having remembered them, we carry them with us. Their lives have touched ours, however gently, and in that touch they endure.